didn't see you there. My name's Aston. I'm with a business called Moto2N, where I do mobile repair and maintenance for Japanese motorcycles and all kinds of scooters on Colorado's Front Range. Today, I am working on an older Vespa ET2. So that's a little 49cc two-stroke scooter made by Modern Vespa in the early 2000s when Vespa came back to the US market. And it's a cool little bike. I installed a Molosi big bore kit on it, I think, 5 to 7 years ago, in 2017, 2018, something like that. And the guy just has a habit of letting it sit around for too long, and then he can't get it fired up, so he has to call me to get it going.
Alright y'all, so the point of this video is to go through the entire process of cleaning the carburetor on this Vespa ET2 little two-stroke scooter. So the first step is to get the scooter to a place where I want to work on it, and that happens to be just off the passenger side of my van. You can see I have very easy access to my tools. The next thing I need to do is verify that it needs its carburetor cleaned. So what I'm doing here is I'm hand choking the engine while I spin it over. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a whole bunch of vacuum worked up in the intake tract. So I want negative pressure inside the carburetor, inside the intake manifold, inside the engine, so that it's sucking on the petcock and it's dispensing fuel into the carburetor. And then assuming at least one of the jets is clear, like the main jet, it'll suck some fuel up and it'll run for a second or two, and I won't have to use carburetor cleaner to test it. This bike's jets were completely plugged up, so my attempts to hand choke it did not result in any kind of running engine. So what I finally do to test it, ultimately to get it running, I shoot a tiny bit of carburetor cleaner into the intake side of the carburetor, and then I start it like that. But before I do that, you can see me checking spark. So that's what I just did right there, is I popped the spark plug boot off. I put a spark plug in the empty boot, I grounded that spark plug against the engine, and then I spun it over and I verified that the engine had spark. Oftentimes when you cannot hand choke an engine to start it, it means that it doesn't have any spark, so that's why I went ahead and double checked that. I always try the Kickstarter because some bikes are weird and they won't start with the electric start, but they will start with the kickstart. So that's why I tried the kickstart. Now, as a last-ditch attempt to make it run for a second or two, I shot some carburetor cleaner into the carburetor, and booyah, it ran for a second or two. That's all I need to know that the carburetor needs to come off. I need to clean the ever-living snot out of it and then reinstall it. The first step to getting the carburetor off is to take a flathead screwdriver to the very top of the carburetor and start removing the cap for the slide. So once you have this cap off, there will be a spring with the carburetor slide, and the carburetor needle will be up through the middle of the slide. So here you can see me turning the top screw on the carburetor. Once that's off, then I will unscrew the hose clamp holding the carburetor onto the intake manifold, disconnect the fuel line, disconnect the oil injection line. If it has one, it might go into the intake manifold on these. I don't remember. Disconnect any vacuum lines. The airbox is already off. So once everything is disconnected from the carburetor and the carburetor has been loosened up from the intake manifold, you will have to address the electric choke. On a whole bunch of scooters use electric chokes, this one included, but Vespa makes it kind of a pain in the butt. There's a sleeve over a bunch of wires, and you need to remove a clamp and then work that sleeve over the wires until the connector for the choke mechanism is exposed. And in this clip, you can see me pointing at the bracket that's holding those wires in place. You'll need to remove the bracket in order to work the sleeve down. In the next shot, you'll see me pointing out the connector for the choke mechanism after I've moved the sleeve down and removed the bracket that's holding it all in place. You can see the connector is held fast using a zip tie that you will have to cut off before you can disconnect the connector and remove the carburetor completely from the bike. Once the carburetor is off of the bike, I like to set up all of my tools and my little trays that I use to disassemble the carburetor completely and clean all of its constituent parts. So with this carburetor, I'm going to have to clean the inside of the carburetor body, the float bowl. Both of the jets were completely plugged up and I had to soak them in carburetor cleaner and brake cleaner. As you can see, the carburetor came pretty clean. This is the after shot. After this moves out of the frame, you're going to see me scrubbing the carburetor parts, literally scrubbing them for about 40 minutes sped up. What I do for work is very improvisational, so you can see that I'm using an aluminum dirt bike stand. That's actually an authentic GYTR Yamaha factory dirt bike stand made out of really light aluminum. Anyway, it's a really nice stand. I use it as a little table to hold tools and supplies. Here you can see my carburetor cleaner and my brake cleaner. I'm using my little makeshift table to hold those so that they're a little bit easier to grab. These are my favorite brands, haha, CRC Brake Clean, the Pro Series original formula, that's the best stuff, and then Gum Out carburetor and choke cleaner. But, you know, in my opinion, most carburetor cleaner and brake cleaners, they're created about the same. Although if you use them every day, you will notice differences in how they take crud off of things. Here you can see me going at it with the carburetor cleaner, a toothbrush, and the float bowl. This carburetor was particularly dirty, and I had to scrub the float bowl for as long as I could stand it to get as much of the particulate matter and broken down ethanol and gasoline out of the plastic float bowl. It took probably half a can of carburetor cleaner and, you know, a significant portion of brake cleaner in order to get this thing in serviceable condition. So you can see me just scrubbing with that toothbrush, applying more brake cleaner, applying more carburetor cleaner, using the can of carburetor cleaner almost like a pressure washer to wash the corrosion off of the inside of the float bowl. Plastic float bowls are particularly hard to deal with. They tend to deform over time. Plastic and ethanol just don't play nice with one another, and the gasoline supply here in the United States is always pretty much 10% ethanol. So that ethanol eats up all your plastic parts, it eats up the O-rings. It makes a mess inside of carburetors, and I wish they didn't sell it, or that 91 octane ethanol free was more readily available here in the States. That would be awesome. Of course, there is an easier way to clean carburetors than scrubbing them on the spot in the customer's driveway. If you happen to have an ultrasonic cleaner in your mobile work van, you can use that. I use an ultrasonic cleaner at home. Occasionally, when the bikes also need parts and they need their carburetors cleaned, I will take the carburetors home with me and I will clean them in the ultrasonic cleaner. This saves me a lot of time, and it also gives me a more of a guarantee that the carburetor is actually going to come clean. The ultrasonic cleaner cleans carburetors from the inside out using sound waves inside a liquid solution to create cavitation that literally scrubs parts from the inside out. So all of the little passages that you can't crawl inside of and scrub from the inside out, that's what an ultrasonic cleaner does for you. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner and you want to do it by hand using copious amounts of brake clean and carburetor cleaner, all I have to say is you need to be very patient. You need to look at all the parts extremely closely. Whatever you think is clean enough probably is not clean enough. I even get caught in that trap sometimes. It's not good. If you don't get the carburetor clean enough and you're just absolutely sure that you did get it clean enough, you can end up chasing your tail, chasing other problems that don't even exist. That's the risk of cleaning things without an ultrasonic cleaner. I don't know how well it comes across in the video, but I try to practice a principle called mise en place. That's a French word or French phrase that I learned from my friends who work at restaurants. The chefs, the sous chefs, people like that, they're very familiar with this concept, but it just means a place for everything and everything in its place. So you can see that I'm cleaning the carburetor over an oil drain pan, and I have my little table set up where I can set my bottles, my chemicals, my supplies. And then there's some tools. You can see those. They're right underneath my my left leg there. You can see them. They're a little bit red. Those are going to end up in a bin that I'll bring out a little bit later. And I use those bins to compartmentalize my tools, my parts, all of my supplies, everything that I need to use. But this concept of mise en place keeps me from losing things or misplacing things while I'm working on people's bikes. Believe me, it's extremely rare for me to misplace or lose anything. Even though I don't have the ultrasonic cleaner with me, I do have compressed air. So I have a onboard air compressor mounted in the passenger seat of my van. And that's the compressor that I use to blow out carburetors. You're going to see it here right now. So that's the compressor with the hose. You can also see the wheel chock. The actual compressor is underneath the wheel chock, but that's what I use to help clean carburetors, to get them as clean as possible on site during a mobile job repairing somebody's scooter. I had to speed this video up because there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to talk over it for an entire hour. So the video is sped up to about 150%. If you're wondering why it looks like I'm moving so fast, that's why the video is sped up. I don't actually move like that in real life. Alright, because we have some time to kill here, I'm going to talk about the outfit that I'm wearing in this video. So the undershirt, that black undershirt I'm wearing, I got that from a friend while I was snowboarding like a million years ago. The t-shirt that I'm wearing over that was made in California by a company called Marine Layer. The jeans that I'm wearing were made in New York City by a company called Hockey. And the shoes I'm wearing were made in the United States by New Balance. Those are 990 V6s. Anyway, that's just some trivia. I like buying USA made stuff as much as I can. And I especially hate Chinese scooters, which is why it's so nice to be working on a Vespa today. So once you have the carburetor completely disassembled with the pilot jet, the main jet set aside, you can remove the air fuel screw if you want. Make sure that the O-ring is still in there, and replace the O-ring if you want to. I've found they tend to stay good. As long as the bike responds to adjustments, then that's a pretty good indication that the O-ring underneath the air fuel screw is good. Here you can see me trying to get a close-up of the pilot jet. That's actually the main jet. So yeah, that's the main jet, and I've worked a piece of copper wire through the middle of it. I was desperately trying to show that to you. But anyway, the way that you actually clean the jets is by taking a stripped piece of copper wire and working it through the center and cleaning it from the inside out. That's a theme here. Using a piece of thin copper wire. You can do that with the pilot jet, the main jet, any kind of secondary jets that you might find in a different type of carburetor, like a pumper carb. There's a million different carburetor configurations, so there's no way I can go through all of them. But the main point is you need to get the inside extremely clean by whatever means necessary, be that an ultrasonic cleaner, or if you don't have one, using lots and lots of brake clean, carburetor clean. You can also soak it in a bucket of some kind of goo. People used to do that back in the day. I found it's a lot easier just to use an ultrasonic cleaner if it doesn't come clean enough, using brake clean and carburetor cleaner. Anyway, I'm basically just rambling at this point, but this particular carburetor cleaning, it could have really benefited from the ultrasonic cleaner. It's just I didn't have it in my van on that day. I actually stopped carrying it around in my van because it's pretty darn big. It's about as big as a 10-gallon fish aquarium. So that little stool that I'm sitting on, my buddy Matt made that for me. He's actually a welding instructor, which is really cool. So yeah, a lot of my stuff is like, it's hand-me-downs, it's stuff that people have given me, it's handmade stuff. I really value things like that, and I think they're important. Giving your friends gifts, telling them that you love them, that's always appreciated, it's always a good thing, and I don't think we do that enough. Anyway, again, I'm just rambling, but now I'm using my air compressor to blow out the carburetor. That's another good trick. Not really a trick, it's kind of just something that you need to do. Once you've cleaned it out as best you can using chemicals, now it's time to use some compressed air. That's about as good as it gets without having an ultrasonic cleaner, is you just clean it from the inside out as best you can using compressed brake clean, compressed carburetor cleaner, and then compressed air to dry it all out and hopefully force all of the gunk back up into the atmosphere where it belongs, instead of inside the carburetor, making our bikes not work properly. Although this carburetor does not have a rubber slide diaphragm like on many carburetors that you'll find on 4-stroke scooters as opposed to 2-stroke scooters, it still has some rubber parts, especially the tip of the needle that goes into the seat that fits onto the float. Those rubber parts, it's a good idea to soak them in 2-stroke oil. 2-stroke oil that is injector rated, like the stuff designed for scooters, has seal conditioners in it that will keep the rubber parts inside your carburetor in good condition. What you're watching me do here is work a razor blade over the needle, the fuel needle that fits into the seat. I'm scraping each one of its sides with a razor blade to make them as smooth as possible so that there's less of a chance of it hanging up against the seat once it's reinstalled. Next up, we have one of my favorite tricks that I am just delighted to share with you. It involves using a drill and a Q-tip and what's called valve lapping compound to polish the seat that the needle fits into. Here you're watching me fit a Q-tip into the end of a drill, and I'm going to set the drill to the highest speed setting, and then I'm going to dab a tiny bit of valve lapping compound onto the tip of the Q-tip, as you can see here. And then I'm going to stick that I'm going to work it into the carburetor's fuel seat, and I'm going to polish the snot out of that seat until it looks like bright, shiny aluminum. And that's what's going to improve the chances of us creating a good seal inside the carburetor. After getting the carburetor body as clean as I possibly can, and after polishing the ever-living crap out of that seat, sometimes you have to do it more than once, but after you've polished the seat, now you have to clean out all of the valve lapping compound. I do that with a can of carburetor cleaner with the little hose nozzle fitted to the end of it, and I just spray out all of that valve lapping compound coming in through the fuel line fitting, coming in through the fuel seat, both sides, blow it out from both sides, blow it out with compressed air, do what you have to do to get all of the valve lapping compound out of that carburetor before you start reassembling it. The first step to reassembling the carburetor is to fit the float with the needle back into the seat into the carb body. The carburetor on the Vespa ET2 is very simple. There's only 2 jets underneath the float bowl. Then you have your float, you have your needle, you have your seat, and then once all of that's reinstalled, after cleaning it as best you can, either using an ultrasonic cleaner or elbow grease and chemicals, once everything is back into the carb body, you fit the float bowl, and then once the float bowl's on, it's time to fit the carburetor back onto the engine and test and see how well it's going to work. It needs to be said that I'm extremely familiar with this particular bike, this individual Vespa ET2. I've been working on this bike for years and years and years. So after I fit the carburetor, I'm going to test run it without the airbox fitted. Sometimes, especially doing mobile repair, it's a good idea to fit the airbox, fit everything back onto the bike exactly the way it would be if the customer were to start it. That way you can tell if it's going to cold start properly. With this bike, I know that it's going to cold start properly, so I'm more interested in knowing how well it's going to run just with the carburetor fitted without the airbox. So you're going to see me test fire it with no airbox installed. And it's just my familiarity with this particular bike. I know it runs really well. I installed a big bore kit on it 5 or 6 years ago, and the bike has gone strong ever since. The only problem it ever has is when the owner lets it sit and the carburetor gets plugged up. That's an extremely common problem. It's the number one problem that I solve with my business. It's the number one problem that scooter owners have. This is a function of the fact that the vast majority of scooters are not fuel injected. The vast majority of scooters have carburetors, and carburetors are extremely sensitive, and they do not like to sit for weeks and weeks, months and months at a time, due to the fact that the gasoline supply here in the States has ethanol in it. As you just saw, fitting the carburetor onto a Vespa ET2 is extremely fast. And then I'm just going to test fire the bike without the airbox fitted. As you can see, it's running. It's blowing that great blue smoke that we like to see out of two-stroke scooters. It seems to be revving. This scoot runs really well. So we're going to move on to reassembling everything that's behind the carburetor. So fitting the airbox, fitting the last piece of bodywork, and then airing up the tires. And then we're going to get paid and we're going to be gone. But I can't get ahead of myself. There's still some work to do. And because I have tools and chemicals and things on the ground and we're moving on to the next step of the installation process, I'm going to go ahead and get organized using my tool bins. I'm going to put all my tools in bins and get them ready to go back in the van so that I can get the heck out of here. So the whole time that I'm getting organized, putting my tools where I want them to be, exercising the principle of mise en place, I'm listening to the scooter and how it's running, how it's idling. So it's idling perfectly nicely without the airbox fitted. So if I start hearing it idling at a lower rate, or if I start hearing the idle go up, I'll move over and inspect what's going on. If the idle shoots to the moon, I'll hit the kill switch and pull the bike. But so far so good with this bike. It runs good, it's revving, it's running good without the airbox. So the next step is to fit the first part of the airbox on. Vespa does not give you too much room inside of that unibody, so you just have to wiggle, wiggle, shake, shake until the little piece of plastic fits where it's supposed to fit. And then once you have it fitted, you just pop the boot back onto the carburetor and then find the 2 screw holes. The 2 screw holes are going to be the last step. I'm going to leave everything loose until it's time to tighten everything up. That's a good little mechanical hint, is if you have multiple screws, do not tighten them up one at a time. Leave them all loose until everything is fitted, until everything's loosely fitted, and then finish tightening everything when you're done. Even if it's not something that fits super tightly, something like an airbox lid, it's a good idea to tighten all of the screws in a crisscross pattern, even if it doesn't call for that in the manual. Anytime you have a pattern of screws, you might as well go crisscross. It helps things kind of get to where they need to be in a precise way. Vespa makes it kind of a pain in the butt to fit the airbox lid back on, because some of the screws you have to tighten and loosen by hand. They have little knobs on them. Those are the screws that fit on the top of the airbox. There's usually 1 or 2 of them on some bikes. I think there's 3. On this particular bike, there's even a screw that it's easy to go in through one of the bodywork holes. You'll see me do that, or maybe my head's going to be in the way. But yeah, I'm going in through the bodywork hole to get this one fitted. And then if we get lucky, you might see me go crisscross here, or at least, at the very least, like side to side, fitting them in and tightening them. And the way that these screws fit on Vespas is kind of leaves something to be desired. It's very easy to strip them because it's a metal fastener going into a plastic housing. So don't tighten them up too much or you run the risk of stripping them. After I get the airbox fitted, I'm going to go ahead and test fire the scooter with the airbox and make sure that it doesn't stall, that it doesn't sputter, that it works the way that it should. If the carburetor is not clean enough, the bike might run funny after you reinstall the airbox. It might run funny to begin with. And if you're working with a scooter that has a vacuum actuated slide diaphragm, the airbox has to be fitted before the bike will rev in the vast majority of cases. So here I am test firing the scooter, bam, the wheel's spinning, we got our blue smoke, it's running really good with the airbox fitted. So the last step is going to be to fit the last bit of bodywork back onto the side of the scooter. Then I'm going to air up the tires using the air compressor mounted in my van, and once the tires are aired up, it's time to pass the scooter on to its owner. Alright, you've read this phrase a million times and a million different motorcycle manuals, but installation is the reverse of disassembly. So, you're going to see me fit the screws for the airbox back into it here in a second. There's 2 screws on the bottom of the airbox. They go through the airbox into some keepers on the engine case and on the rear fender in the case of the rear mount. The rear fastener goes through a hole in the airbox. It's pretty fun to fit. Just play with it, lay down on the ground, do whatever you have to do to get it to thread nicely into its keeper onto the rear fender. Once you do that, or once I've done that, it's time to fit the bracket for the choke sleeve, that little bit of heat shrink that's over the choke wires. You'll see me replace that and then fit the bracket back onto the engine where it goes. So I make these videos to hopefully help out newbie mechanics with the mechanical work, the projects that they're trying to complete. With that in mind, I've worked out 3 rules for mechanical work. I worked these rules out when I was a baby mechanic, when I first started working on motorcycles professionally. Those 3 rules are: don't lose anything, don't break anything, and be extremely careful with what you are doing. Pay ridiculously close attention to what you are doing when you are working on a scooter, motorcycle, car, boat, airplane, generator. Unless you want to break it, you need to be extremely careful. You can see me being not very careful right here as I helicopter that ratchet around to tighten up the rear bolt on the airbox of this Vespa ET2. That's acceptable. I know that these parts can take that kind of carelessness, so I will just helicopter a big giant bolt right into its hole. it can work if you have some experience. But if you're not experienced, don't lose things, don't break things, and be ridiculously careful with what you are doing. Pay ridiculously close attention to what you are doing. You can see me squeezing this bracket in a very precise way to get it around its heat shrink tubing, and then opening it up back again. And then now I have to run the bolt through, and there's a whole process for that. It's easier to fit it through the bracket first and then fit it down into its threads, as you can see here. And the torque on this is going to be about half of what you can get out of a 3/8 drive ratchet. That's approximately 8 to 12 foot-pounds. You do not need a torque wrench for these types of fasteners, not at all. I harp on this a lot, but torque wrenches are a bad idea generally unless you're torquing down the cylinder head onto a fresh engine. For just about every other fastener on a bike, you can use the size of the tool to kind of dictate how much torque it's going to get. That and the torque rating is based on the fastener. When you're working with things like oil drain bolts, it's a good idea to just use common sense and whatever tool is appropriate to tighten it. And then a little bit on the loose side, you know, it can't be too loose or it'll fall out. But a little bit on the loose side is way better than going too tight and stripping an oil drain bolt and having to replace a set of engine cases or replace an oil pan just because you weren't careful enough and you used the wrong tool because you thought that you were using the right tool. You think that a torque wrench is going to protect you, but what happens is you wait for a click that never comes and then you destroy an engine or an expensive part on a motorcycle. So avoid that like the freaking plague. Alright, it's time to finish up this video. I'm airing up the tires. I'm about to pass the scooter off to its owner and get paid for all of this work that I just did. This scooter went from sitting for a couple of years, getting its carburetor all gummed up. Luckily, the fuel tank is still in good condition. These Vespas use plastic fuel tanks that don't tend to rust, so this scooter should run for a good long time. For its owner, thanks a bunch for watching. Bye-bye.